Welcome to the Liberty Myself Emancipation Media Club. Today's reading is
A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain.
This is part of our twice-daily content heartbeat designed to help build information autonomy in our algorithm-dominated world. Listen, reflect, and engage however works for you. Without further ado, let's jump in. Stay free.
A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. Chapter X. Beginnings of Civilization. The Round Table soon heard of the challenge, and of course it was a good deal discussed, for such things interested the boys. The king thought I ought now to set forth in quest of adventures, so that I might gain renown and be the more worthy to meet Sir Sagramore when the several years should have rolled away. I excused myself for the present. I said it would take me 3 or 4 years yet to get things well fixed up and going smoothly. Then I should be ready. All the chances were that at the end of that time Sir Sagramore would still be out grailing, so no valuable time would be lost by the postponement. I should then have been in office 6 or 7 years, and I believed my system and machinery would be so well developed that I could take a holiday without its working any harm. I was pretty well satisfied with what I had already accomplished. In various quiet nooks and corners I had the beginnings of all sorts of industries underway, nuclei of future vast factories. The iron and steel missionaries of my future civilization. In these were gathered together the brightest young minds I could find, and I kept agents out raking the country for more, all the time. I was training a crowd of ignorant folk into experts in every sort of handiwork and scientific calling. These nurseries of mine went smoothly and privately along undisturbed in their obscure country retreats, for nobody was allowed to come into their precincts without a special permit, for I was afraid of the church. I had started a teacher factory and a lot of Sunday schools the first thing. As a result, I now had an admirable system of graded schools in full blast in those places, and also a complete variety of Protestant congregations all in a prosperous and growing condition. Everybody could be any kind of a Christian he wanted to, there was perfect freedom in that matter. But I confined public religious teaching to the churches and the Sunday schools, permitting nothing of it in my other educational buildings. I could have given my own sect the preference and made everybody a Presbyterian without any trouble, but that would have been to affront a law of human nature. Spiritual wants and instincts are as various in the human family as are physical appetites, complexions, and features, and a man is only at his best, morally, when he is equipped with the religious garment whose color and shape and size most nicely accommodate themselves to the spiritual complexion, angularities, and stature of the individual who wears it. And, besides, I was afraid of a united church. It makes a mighty power, the mightiest conceivable, and then when it by and by gets into selfish hands, as it is always bound to do, it means death to human liberty and paralysis to human thought. All mines were royal property, and there were a good many of them. They had formerly been worked as savages always work mines, holes grubbed in the earth and the mineral brought up in sacks of hide by hand, at the rate of a ton a day. But I had begun to put the mining on a scientific basis as early as I could. Yes, I had made pretty handsome progress when Sir Sagramore's challenge struck me. 4 years rolled by, and then, well, you would never imagine it in the world. Unlimited power is the ideal thing when it is in safe hands. The despotism of heaven is the one absolutely perfect government. An earthly despotism would be the absolutely perfect earthly government, if the conditions were the same. Namely, the despot the perfectest individual of the human race, and his lease of life perpetual. But as a perishable perfect man must die, and leave his despotism in the hands of an imperfect successor, an earthly despotism is not merely a bad form of government, it is the worst form that is possible. My works showed what a despot could do with the resources of a kingdom at his command. Unsuspected by this dark land, I had the civilization of the 19th century booming under its very nose. It was fenced away from the public view, but there it was, a gigantic and unassailable fact, and to be heard from. Yet, if I lived and had luck, there it was, as sure a fact and as substantial a fact as any serene volcano, standing innocent with its smokeless summit in the blue sky and giving no sign of the rising hell in its bowels. My schools and churches were children 4 years before, they were grown up now. My shops of that day were vast factories now, where I had a dozen trained men then. I had 1,000 now, where I had 1 brilliant expert then, I had 50 now. I stood with my hand on the cock, so to speak, ready to turn it on and flood the midnight world with light at any moment. But I was not going to do the thing in that sudden way. It was not my policy. The people could not have stood it, and, moreover, I should have had the established Roman Catholic Church on my back in a minute. No, I had been going cautiously all the while. I had had confidential agents trickling through the country some time, whose office was to undermine knighthood by imperceptible degrees, and to gnaw a little at this and that and the other superstition, and so prepare the way gradually for a better order of things. I was turning on my light one candle power at a time, and meant to continue to do so. I had scattered some branch schools secretly about the kingdom, and they were doing very well. I meant to work this racket more and more, as time wore on, if nothing occurred to frighten me. One of my deepest secrets was my West Point, my military academy. I kept that most jealously out of sight, and I did the same with my naval academy which I had established at a remote seaport. Both were prospering to my satisfaction. Clarence was 22 now, and was my head executive, my right hand. He was a darling, he was equal to anything, there wasn't anything he couldn't turn his hand to. Of late I had been training him for journalism, for the time seemed about right for a start in the newspaper line, nothing big, but just a small weekly for experimental circulation in my civilization nurseries. He took to it like a duck, there was an editor concealed in him, sure. Already he had doubled himself in one way, he talked 6th century and wrote 19th. His journalistic style was climbing, steadily, it was already up to the back settlement Alabama mark, and couldn't be told from the editorial output of that region either by matter or flavor. We had another large departure on hand, too. This was a telegraph and a telephone, our first venture in this line. These wires were for private service only, as yet, and must be kept private until a riper day should come. We had a gang of men on the road, working mainly by night. They were stringing ground wires. We were afraid to put up poles, for they would attract too much inquiry. Ground wires were good enough, in both instances, for my wires were protected by an insulation of my own invention which was perfect. My men had orders to strike across country, avoiding roads, and establishing connection with any considerable towns whose lights betrayed their presence, and leaving experts in charge. Nobody could tell you how to find any place in the kingdom. For nobody ever went intentionally to any place, but only struck it by accident in his wanderings, and then generally left it without thinking to inquire what its name was. At one time and another we had sent out topographical expeditions to survey and map the kingdom, but the priests had always interfered and raised trouble. So we had given the thing up. For the present, it would be poor wisdom to antagonize the church. As for the general condition of the country, it was as it had been when I arrived in it. To all intents and purposes, I had made changes, but they were necessarily slight, and they were not noticeable. Thus far, I had not even meddled with taxation, outside of the taxes which provided the royal revenues. I had systematized those, and put the service on an effective and righteous basis. As a result, these revenues were already quadrupled, and yet the burden was so much more equably distributed than before, that all the kingdom felt a sense of relief, and the praises of my administration were hearty and general. Personally, I struck an interruption, now, but I did not mind it. It could not have happened at a better time. Earlier it could have annoyed me, but now everything was in good hands and swimming right along. The king had reminded me several times, of late, that the postponement I had asked for, 4 years before, had about run out now. It was a hint that I ought to be starting out to seek adventures and get up a reputation of a size to make me worthy of the honor of breaking a lance with Sir Sagramore, who was still out grailing, but was being hunted for by various relief expeditions, and might be found any year, now. So you see I was expecting this interruption, it did not take me by surprise. Chapter 11. The Yankee in Search of Adventures. There never was such a country for wandering liars, and they were of both sexes. Hardly a month went by without one of these tramps arriving, and generally loaded with a tale about some princess or other wanting help to get her out of some faraway castle where she was held in captivity by a lawless scoundrel. Usually a giant. Now you would think that the first thing the king would do after listening to such a novelette from an entire stranger, would be to ask for credentials, yes, and a pointer or two as to locality of castle, best route to it, and so on. But nobody ever thought of so simple and common sense a thing at that. No, everybody swallowed these people's lies whole, and never asked a question of any sort or about anything. Well, one day when I was not around, one of these people came along. It was a she-one. This time, and told a tale of the usual pattern. Her mistress was a captive in a vast and gloomy castle, along with 44 other young and beautiful girls, pretty much all of them princesses. They had been languishing in that cruel captivity for 26 years. The masters of the castle were 3 stupendous brothers, each with 4 arms and 1 eye, the eye in the center of the forehead, and as big as a fruit. Sort of fruit not mentioned, their usual slovenliness in statistics. Would you believe it? The king and the whole round table were in raptures over this preposterous opportunity for adventure. Every knight of the table jumped for the chance, and begged for it, but to their vexation and chagrin the king conferred it upon me, who had not asked for it at all. By an effort, I contained my joy when Clarence brought me the news. But he could not contain his mouth gushed delight and gratitude in a steady discharge. Delight in my good fortune, gratitude to the king for this splendid mark of his favor for me. He could keep neither his legs nor his body still, but pirouetted about the place in an airy ecstasy of happiness. On my side, I could have cursed the kindness that conferred upon me this benefaction, but I kept my vexation under the surface for policy's sake, and did what I could to let on to be glad. Indeed, I said I was glad. And in a way it was true. I was as glad as a person is when he is scalped. Well, one must make the best of things, and not waste time with useless fretting, but get down to business and see what can be done. In all lies there is wheat among the chaff. I must get at the wheat in this case. So I sent for the girl and she came. She was a comely enough creature, and soft and modest, but, if signs went for anything, she didn't know as much as a lady's watch. I said, "My dear, have you been questioned as to particulars?" She said she hadn't. "Well, I didn't expect you had, but I thought I would ask, to make sure. It's the way I've been raised. Now you mustn't take it unkindly if I remind you that as we don't know you, we must go a little slow. You may be all right, of course. And we'll hope that you are, but to take it for granted isn't business. You understand that. I'm obliged to ask you a few questions. Just answer up fair and square, and don't be afraid. Where do you live, when you are at home?" "In the land of Moder, fair sir." "Land of Moder. I don't remember hearing of it before. Parents living? As to that, I know not if they be yet on live, sith it is many years that I have lain shut up in the castle." "Your name, please?" "I hight the Demoiselle Alison de la Cartellois. And it please you, do you know anybody here who can identify you?" "That were not likely, fair lord, I being come hither now for the first time." "Have you brought any letters, any documents, any proofs that you are trustworthy and truthful?" "Of a surety, no, and wherefore should I? Have I not a tongue, and cannot I say all that myself?" "But your saying it, you know, and somebody else's saying it, is different." "Different? How might that be? I fear me I do not understand." "Don't understand? Land of, why, you see, why, great Scott, can't you understand a little thing like that? Can't you understand the difference between why do you look so innocent and idiotic?" "I? In truth I know not, but an it were the will of God." Yes, I reckon that's about the size of it. Don't mind my seeming excited, I'm not. Let us change the subject. Now as to this castle, with 45 princesses in it, and 3 ogres at the head of it, tell me, where is this harem?" "Harem? The castle. You understand, where is the castle? Oh, as to that, it is great, and strong, and well beseen, and lieth in a far country." "Yes, it is many leagues." "How many?" "Ah, fair sir, it were woundily hard to tell, they are so many, and do so lap the one upon the other, and being made all in the same image and tincted with the same color, one may not know the one league from its fellow, nor how to count them except they be taken apart, and ye wit well it were God's work to do that, being not within man's capacity. For ye will note, hold on, never mind about the distance, whereabouts does the castle lie? What's the direction from here?" "Ah, please you sir, it hath no direction from here, by reason that the road leeth not straight, but turneth evermore, wherefore the direction of its place abideth not, but is sometime under the one sky and anon under another. Whereso if ye be minded that it is in the east, and wend thitherward, ye shall observe that the way of the road doth yet again turn upon itself by the space of half a circle. And this marvel happening again and yet again and still again, it will grieve you that you had thought by vanities of the mind to thwart and bring to naught the will of him that giveth not a castle a direction from a place except it pleaseth him, and if it please him not, will the rather that even all castles and all directions thereunto vanish out of the earth, leaving the places wherein they tarried desolate and vacant, so warning his creatures that where he will, and where he will not he. Oh, that's all right, give us a rest, never mind about the direction, hang the direction, I beg pardon, I beg 1,000 pardons, I am not well today, pay no attention when I soliloquize, it is an old habit, an old, bad habit, and hard to get rid of when one's digestion is all disordered with eating food that was raised forever and ever before he was born, good land. A man can't keep his functions regular on spring chickens 1,300 years old. But come, never mind about that. Have you got such a thing as a map of that region about you? Now a good map. Is it peradventure that manner of thing which of late the unbelievers have brought from over the great seas, which, being boiled in oil, and an onion and salt added thereto, doth? What, a map? What are you talking about? Don't you know what a map is? There, never mind, don't explain. I hate explanations, they fog a thing up so that you can't tell anything about it. Run along, dear, good day. Show her the way, Clarence. Oh, well, it was reasonably plain. Now, why these donkeys didn't prospect these liars for details. It may be that this girl had a fact in her somewhere, but I don't believe you could have sluiced it out with a hydraulic, nor got it with the earlier forms of blasting, even, it was a case for dynamite. Why, she was a perfect ass, and yet the king and his knights had listened to her as if she had been a leaf out of the gospel. It kind of sizes up the whole party. And think of the simple ways of this court. This wandering wench hadn't any more trouble to get access to the king in his palace than she would have had to get into the poorhouse in my day and country. In fact, he was glad to see her, glad to hear her tale, with that adventure of hers to offer. She was as welcome as a corpse is to a coroner. Just as I was ending up these reflections, Clarence came back. I remarked upon the barren result of my efforts with the girl, hadn't got hold of a single point that could help me to find the castle. The youth looked a little surprised, or puzzled, or something, and intimated that he had been wondering to himself what I had wanted to ask the girl all those questions for. Why, great guns, I said, don't I want to find the castle? And how else would I go about it? Sweet your worship, one may lightly answer that, I ween. She will go with thee. They always do. She will ride with thee. Ride with me? Nonsense. But of a truth she will. She will ride with thee. Thou shalt see. What? She browse around the hills and scour the woods with me, alone. And I as good as engaged to be married? Why, it's scandalous. Think how it would look. My, the dear face that rose before me. The boy was eager to know all about this tender matter. I swore him to secrecy and then whispered her name, Puss Flanagan. He looked disappointed, and said he didn't remember the countess. How natural it was for the little courtier to give her a rank. He asked me where she lived. In East Har. I came to myself and stopped. A little confused, then I said, never mind, now, I'll tell you some time. And might he see her? Would I let him see her some day? It was but a little thing to promise, 1,300 years or so, and he so eager, so I said yes. But I sighed, I couldn't help it. And yet there was no sense in sighing, for she wasn't born yet. But that is the way we are made, we don't reason, where we feel, we just feel. My expedition was all the talk that day and that night, and the boys were very good to me. And made much of me, and seemed to have forgotten their vexation and disappointment, and come to be as anxious for me to hive those ogres and set those ripe old virgins loose as if it were themselves that had the contract. Well, they were good children, but just children, that is all. And they gave me no end of points about how to scout for giants, and how to scoop them in, and they told me all sorts of charms against enchantments, and gave me salves and other rubbish to put on my wounds. But it never occurred to one of them to reflect that if I was such a wonderful necromancer as I was pretending to be, I ought not to need salves or instructions, or charms against enchantments, and, least of all, arms and armor, on a foray of any kind, even against fire-spouting dragons, and devils hot from perdition, let alone such poor adversaries as these I was after, these commonplace ogres of the back settlements. I was to have an early breakfast, and start at dawn, for that was the usual way. But I had the demon's own time with my armor, and this delayed me a little. It is troublesome to get into, and there is so much detail. First you wrap a layer or two of blanket around your body, for a sort of cushion and to keep off the cold iron, then you put on your sleeves and shirt of chainmail. These are made of small steel links woven together, and they form a fabric so flexible that if you toss your shirt onto the floor, it slumps into a pile like a peck of wet fish net. It is very heavy and is nearly the uncomfortablest material in the world for a night shirt, yet plenty used it for that, tax collectors and reformers, and one-horse kings with a defective title, and those sorts of people. Then you put on your shoes, flat boats roofed over with interleaving bands of steel, and screw your clumsy spurs into the heels. Next you buckle your greaves on your legs, and your cuisses on your thighs, then come your backplate and your breastplate, and you begin to feel crowded. Then you hitch onto the breastplate the half petticoat of broad overlapping bands of steel which hangs down in front but is scalloped out behind so you can sit down, and isn't any real improvement on an inverted coal scuttle. Either for looks or for wear or to wipe your hands on. Next you belt on your sword. Then you put your stovepipe joints onto your arms, your iron gauntlets onto your hands, your iron rat trap onto your head, with a rag of steel web hitched onto it to hang over the back of your neck. And there you are, snug as a candle in a candle mold. This is no time to dance. Well, a man that is packed away like that is a nut that isn't worth the cracking. There is so little of the meat, when you get down to it. By comparison with the shell. The boys helped me, or I never could have got in. Just as we finished, Sir Bedivere happened in, and I saw that as like as not I hadn't chosen the most convenient outfit for a long trip. How stately he looked, and tall and broad and grand. He had on his head a conical steel casque that only came down to his ears, and for visor had only a narrow steel bar that extended down to his upper lip and protected his nose, and all the rest of him, from neck to heel, was flexible chain mail, trousers and all. But pretty much all of him was hidden under his outside garment, which of course was of chainmail, as I said, and hung straight from his shoulders to his ankles, and from his middle to the bottom, both before and behind, was divided, so that he could ride and let the skirts hang down on each side. He was going grailing, and it was just the outfit for it, too. I would have given a good deal for that ulster, but it was too late now to be fooling around. The sun was just up, the king and the court were all on hand to see me off and wish me luck, so it wouldn't be etiquette for me to tarry. You don't get on your horse yourself, no, if you tried it you would get disappointed. They carry you out, just as they carry a sun-struck man to the drugstore, and put you on, and help get you to rights, and fix your feet in the stirrups, and all the while you do feel so strange and stuffy and like somebody else. Like somebody that has been married on a sudden. Or struck by lightning, or something like that, and hasn't quite fetched around yet, and is sort of numb, and can't just get his bearings. Then they stood up the mast they called a spear, in its socket by my left foot, and I gripped it with my hand. Lastly they hung my shield around my neck, and I was all complete and ready to up anchor and get to sea. Everybody was as good to me as they could be, and a maid of honor gave me the stirrup cup her own self. There was nothing more to do now, but for that damsel to get up behind me on a pillion, which she did, and put an arm or so around me to hold on. And so we started, and everybody gave us a good-bye and waved their handkerchiefs or helmets. And everybody we met, going down the hill and through the village was respectful to us, except some shabby little boys on the outskirts. They said, "Oh, what a guy," and hove clods at us. In my experience boys are the same in all ages. They don't respect anything, they don't care for anything or anybody. They say go up, bald head to the prophet going his unoffending way in the grey of antiquity. They sass me in the holy gloom of the Middle Ages, and I had seen them act the same way in Buchanan's administration, I remember, because I was there and helped. The prophet had his bears and settled with his boys, and I wanted to get down and settle with mine, but it wouldn't answer, because I couldn't have got up again. I hate a country without a derrick. Chapter 12. Slow torture. Straight off, we were in the country. It was most lovely and pleasant in those sylvan solitudes in the early cool morning in the first freshness of autumn. From hilltops we saw fair green valleys lying spread out below, with streams winding through them, and island groves of trees here and there, and huge lonely oaks scattered about and casting black blots of shade, and beyond the valleys we saw the ranges of hills, blue with haze, stretching away in billowy perspective to the horizon, with at wide intervals a dim fleck of white or gray on a wave summit, which we knew was a castle. We crossed broad natural lawns sparkling with dew, and we moved like spirits, the cushioned turf giving out no sound of footfall. We dreamed along through glades in a mist of green light that got its tint from the sun-drenched roof of leaves overhead, and by our feet the clearest and coldest of runlets went frisking and gossiping over its reefs and making a sort of whispering music, comfortable to hear, and at times we left the world behind and entered into the solemn great deeps and rich gloom of the forest, where furtive wild things whisked and scurried by and were gone before you could even get your eye on the place where the noise was, and where only the earliest birds were turning out and getting to business with a song here and a quarrel yonder and a mysterious far-off hammering and drumming for worms on a tree trunk away somewhere in the impenetrable remotenesses of the woods. And by out we would swing again into the glare. About the third or fourth or fifth time that we swung out into the glare, it was along there somewhere. A couple of hours or so after sun-up, it wasn't as pleasant as it had been. It was beginning to get hot. This was quite noticeable. We had a very long pull, after that, without any shade. Now it is curious how progressively little frets grow and multiply after they once get a start. Things which I didn't mind at all, at first, I began to mind now, and more, too, all the time. The first 10 or 15 times I wanted my handkerchief I didn't seem to care, I got along, and said never mind. It isn't any matter, and dropped it out of my mind. But now it was different, I wanted it all the time, it was nag, right along, and no rest. I couldn't get it out of my mind, and so at last I lost my temper and said hang a man that would make a suit of armor without any pockets in it. You see, I had my handkerchief in my helmet, and some other things, but it was that kind of a helmet that you can't take off by yourself. That hadn't occurred to me when I put it there, and in fact I didn't know it. I supposed it would be particularly convenient there. And so now, the thought of its being there, so handy and close by, and yet not get it able, made it all the worse and the harder to bear. Yes, the thing that you can't get is the thing that you want, mainly, everyone has noticed that. Well, it took my mind off from everything else, took it clear off, and centered it in my helmet, and mile after mile, there it stayed, imagining the handkerchief, picturing the handkerchief. And it was bitter and aggravating to have the salt sweat keep trickling down into my eyes. And I couldn't get at it. It seems like a little thing, on paper, but it was not a little thing at all, it was the most real kind of misery. I would not say it if it was not so. I made up my mind that I would carry along a reticule next time, let it look how it might, and people say what they would. Of course these iron dudes of the round table would think it was scandalous, and maybe raise shoal about it, but as for me, give me comfort first, and style afterwards. So we jogged along, and now and then we struck a stretch of dust, and it would tumble up in clouds and get into my nose and make me sneeze and cry, and of course I said things I oughtn't to have said, I don't deny that. I am not better than others. We couldn't seem to meet anybody in this lonesome Britain, not even an ogre, and, in the mood I was in then, it was well for the ogre, that is, an ogre with a handkerchief. Most knights would have thought of nothing but getting his armor, but so I got his bandana. He could keep his hardware, for all of me. Meantime, it was getting hotter and hotter in there. You see, the sun was beating down and warming up the iron more and more all the time. Well, when you are hot, that way, every little thing irritates you. When I trotted, I rattled like a crate of dishes, and that annoyed me, and moreover I couldn't seem to stand that shield slatting and banging, now about my breast, now around my back, and if I dropped into a walk my joints creaked and screeched in that wearisome way that a wheelbarrow does. And as we didn't create any breeze at that gate, I was like to get fried in that stove. And besides, the quieter you went the heavier the iron settled down on you and the more and more tons you seemed to weigh every minute. And you had to be always changing hands, and passing your spear over to the other foot, it got so irksome for one hand to hold it long at a time. Well, you know, when you perspire that way, in rivers, there comes a time when you itch. You are inside, your hands are outside, so there you are, nothing but iron between. It is not a light thing, let it sound as it may. First it is one place, then another, then some more, and it goes on spreading and spreading. And at last the territory is all occupied, and nobody can imagine what you feel like, nor how unpleasant it is. And when it had got to the worst, and it seemed to me that I could not stand anything more, a fly got in through the bars and settled on my nose, and the bars were stuck and wouldn't work, and I couldn't get the visor up, and I could only shake my head, which was baking hot by this time, and the fly. Well, you know how a fly acts when he has got a certainty. He only minded the shaking enough to change from nose to lip. And lip to ear, and buzz all around in there, and keep on lighting and biting, in a way that a person, already so distressed as I was, simply could not stand. So I gave in, and got Alisande to unship the helmet and relieve me of it. Then she emptied the conveniences out of it and fetched it full of water, and I drank and then stood up, and she poured the rest down inside the armor. One cannot think how refreshing it was. She continued to fetch and pour until I was well soaked and thoroughly comfortable. It was good to have a rest and peace. But nothing is quite perfect in this life, at any time. I had made a pipe a while back, and also some pretty fair tobacco, not the real thing, but what some of the Indians use, the inside bark of the willow, dried. These comforts had been in the helmet, and now I had them again, but no matches. Gradually, as the time wore along, one annoying fact was borne in upon my understanding, that we were weatherbound. An armed novice cannot mount his horse without help and plenty of it. Sandy was not enough for me, anyway. We had to wait until somebody should come along. Waiting, in silence, would have been agreeable enough, for I was full of matter for reflection, and wanted to give it a chance to work. I wanted to try and think out how it was that rational or even half-rational men could ever have learned to wear armor, considering its inconveniences, and how they had managed to keep up such a fashion for generations when it was plain that what I had suffered today they had had to suffer all the days of their lives. I wanted to think that out, and moreover I wanted to think out some way to reform this evil and persuade the people to let the foolish fashion die out, but thinking was out of the question in the circumstances. You couldn't think where Sandy was. She was a quite biddable creature and good-hearted, but she had a flow of talk that was as steady as a mill, and made your head sore like the drays and wagons in a city. If she had had a cork she would have been a comfort. But you can't cork that kind. They would die. Her clack was going all day, and you would think something would surely happen to her works, by and by, but no, they never got out of order, and she never had to slack up for words. She could grind, and pump, and churn, and buzz by the week, and never stop to oil up or blow out. And yet the result was just nothing but wind. She never had any ideas, any more than a fog has. She was a perfect blatherskite, I mean for jaw, talk, jabber, jabber. But just as good as she could be. I hadn't minded her mill that morning, on account of having that hornet's nest of other troubles, but more than once in the afternoon I had to say, "Take a rest, child, the way you are using up all the domestic air, the kingdom will have to go to importing it by tomorrow, and it's a low enough treasury without that." Chapter 13. Freeman. Yes, it is strange how little a while at a time a person can be contented. Only a little while back, when I was writing and suffering. What a heaven this peace, this rest, this sweet serenity in this secluded shady nook by this purling stream would have seemed, where I could keep perfectly comfortable all the time by pouring a dipper of water into my armor now and then. Yet already I was getting dissatisfied, partly because I could not light my pipe, for, although I had long ago started a match factory, I had forgotten to bring matches with me, and partly because we had nothing to eat. Here was another illustration of the childlike improvidence of this age and people. A man in armor always trusted to chance for his food on a journey, and would have been scandalized at the idea of hanging a basket of sandwiches on his spear. There was probably not a knight of all the Round Table combination who would not rather have died than been caught carrying such a thing as that on his flagstaff. And yet there could not be anything more sensible. It had been my intention to smuggle a couple of sandwiches into my helmet, but I was interrupted in the act, and had to make an excuse and lay them aside. And a dog got them. Night approached, and with it a storm. The darkness came on fast. We must camp, of course. I found a good shelter for the demoiselle under a rock, and went off and found another for myself. But I was obliged to remain in my armor, because I could not get it off by myself and yet could not allow Alisande to help, because it would have seemed so like undressing before folk. It would not have amounted to that in reality, because I had clothes on underneath, but the prejudices of one's breeding are not gotten rid of just a jump. And I knew that when it came to stripping off that bob-tailed iron petticoat I should be embarrassed. With the storm came a change of weather, and the stronger the wind blew, and the wilder the rain lashed around, the colder and colder it got. Pretty soon, various kinds of bugs and ants and worms and things began to flock in out of the wet and crawl down inside my armor to get warm, and while some of them behaved well enough, and snuggled up amongst my clothes and got quiet, the majority were of a restless, uncomfortable sort, and never stayed still, but went on prowling and hunting for they did not know what, especially the ants, which went tickling along in wearisome procession from one end of me to the other by the hour, and are a kind of creatures which I never wish to sleep with again. It would be my advice to persons situated in this way, to not roll or thrash around, because this excites the interest of all the different sorts of animals and makes every last one of them want to turn out and see what is going on. And this makes things worse than they were before, and of course makes you objurgate harder, too, if you can. Still, if one did not roll and thrash around he would die, so perhaps it is as well to do one way as the other, there is no real choice. Even after I was frozen solid one could still distinguish that tickling, just as a corpse does when he is taking electric treatment. I said I would never wear armor after this trip. All those trying hours whilst I was frozen and yet was in a living fire. As you may say, on account of that swarm of crawlers, that same unanswerable question kept circling and circling through my tired head. How do people stand this miserable armor? How have they managed to stand it all these generations? How can they sleep at night for dreading the tortures of next day? When the morning came at last, I was in a bad enough plight, seedy, drowsy, fagged, from want of sleep, weary from thrashing around, famished from long fasting, pining for a bath, and to get rid of the animals. And crippled with rheumatism. And how had it fared with the nobly born, the titled aristocrat, the demoiselle Alison de la Cartellois? Why, she was as fresh as a squirrel, she had slept like the dead, and as for a bath, probably neither she nor any other noble in the land had ever had one, and so she was not missing it. Measured by modern standards, they were merely modified savages, those people. This noble lady showed no impatience to get to breakfast, and that smacks of the savage. 2. On their journeys those Britons were used to long fasts, and knew how to bear them, and also how to freight up against probable fasts before starting, after the style of the Indian and the anaconda. As like as not, Sandy was loaded for a 3-day stretch. We were off before sunrise, Sandy riding and I limping along behind. In half an hour we came upon a group of ragged poor creatures who had assembled to mend the thing which was regarded as a road. They were as humble as animals to me. And when I proposed to breakfast with them, they were so flattered, so overwhelmed by this extraordinary condescension of mine that at first they were not able to believe that I was in earnest. My lady put up her scornful lip and withdrew to one side. She said in their hearing that she would as soon think of eating with the other cattle. A remark which embarrassed these poor devils merely because it referred to them, and not because it insulted or offended them, for it didn't. And yet they were not slaves. Not chattels. By a sarcasm of law and phrase they were freemen. 7/10 of the free population of the country were of just their class and degree, small independent farmers, artisans, etc., which is to say, they were the nation, the actual nation, they were about all of it that was useful, or worth saving, or really respect-worthy, and to subtract them would have been to subtract the nation and leave behind some dregs, some refuse, in the shape of a king, nobility and gentry. Idle, unproductive, acquainted mainly with the arts of wasting and destroying, and of no sort of use or value in any rationally constructed world. And yet, by ingenious contrivance, this gilded minority, instead of being in the tail of the procession where it belonged, was marching head up and banners flying, at the other end of it, had elected itself to be the nation, and these innumerable clams had permitted it so long that they had come at last to accept it as a truth, and not only that, but to believe it right and as it should be. The priests had told their fathers and themselves that this ironical state of things was ordained of God. And so, not reflecting upon how unlike God it would be to amuse himself with sarcasms, and especially such poor transparent ones as this, they had dropped the matter there and become respectfully quiet. The talk of these meek people had a strange enough sound in a formerly American ear. They were freemen, but they could not leave the estates of their lord or their bishop without his permission, they could not prepare their own bread, but must have their corn ground and their bread baked at his mill and his bakery. And pay roundly for the same. They could not sell a piece of their own property without paying him a handsome percentage of the proceeds, nor buy a piece of somebody else's without remembering him in cash for the privilege. They had to harvest his grain for him gratis, and be ready to come at a moment's notice, leaving their own crop to destruction by the threatened storm. They had to let him plant fruit trees in their fields, and then keep their indignation to themselves when his heedless fruit gatherers trampled the grain around the trees. They had to smother their anger when his hunting parties galloped through their fields laying waste the result of their patient toil. They were not allowed to keep doves themselves, and when the swarms from my lord's dovecote settled on their crops they must not lose their temper and kill a bird, for awful would the penalty be. When the harvest was at last gathered, then came the procession of robbers to levy their blackmail upon it. First the church carted off its fat tenth, then the king's commissioner took his 20th. Then my lord's people made a mighty inroad upon the remainder, after which, the skinned freeman had liberty to bestow the remnant in his barn, in case it was worth the trouble, there were taxes, and taxes, and taxes, and more taxes, and taxes again, and yet other taxes, upon this free and independent pauper, but none upon his lord the baron or the bishop, none upon the wasteful nobility or the all-devouring church. If the baron would sleep unvexed, the freeman must sit up all night after his day's work and whip the ponds to keep the frogs quiet. If the freeman's daughter, but no, that last infamy of monarchical government is unprintable, and finally, if the freeman, grown desperate with his tortures, found his life unendurable under such conditions, and sacrificed it and fled to death for mercy and refuge, the gentle church condemned him to eternal fire. The gentle law buried him at midnight at the crossroads with a stake through his back, and his master the baron or the bishop confiscated all his property and turned his widow and his orphans out of doors. And here were these freemen assembled in the early morning to work on their lord the bishop's road 3 days each, gratis, every head of a family, and every son of a family, 3 days each, gratis, and a day or so added for their servants. Why, it was like reading about France and the French, before the ever-memorable and blessed Revolution, which swept 1,000 years of such villainy away in one swift tidal wave of blood. 1. A settlement of that hoary debt in the proportion of half a drop of blood for each hogshead of it that had been pressed by slow tortures out of that people in the weary stretch of 10 centuries of wrong and shame and misery, the like of which was not to be mated but in hell. There were 2 reigns of terror, if we would but remember it and consider it. The one wrought murder in hot passion, the other in heartless cold blood. The one lasted mere months, the other had lasted 1,000 years. The one inflicted death upon 10,000 persons, the other upon 100 millions. But our shudders are all for the horrors of the minor terror, the momentary terror, so to speak, whereas, what is the horror of swift death by the axe, compared with lifelong death from hunger? Cold, insult, cruelty, and heartbreak? What is swift death by lightning compared with death by slow fire at the stake? A city cemetery could contain the coffins filled by that brief terror which we have all been so diligently taught to shiver at and mourn over. But all France could hardly contain the coffins filled by that older and real terror. That unspeakably bitter and awful terror which none of us has been taught to see in its vastness or pity as it deserves. These poor ostensible freemen who were sharing their breakfast and their talk with me were as full of humble reverence for their king and church and nobility as their worst enemy could desire. There was something pitifully ludicrous about it. I asked them if they supposed a nation of people ever existed, who, with a free vote in every man's hand, would elect that a single family and its descendants should reign over it forever, whether gifted or boobies, to the exclusion of all other families, including the voters, and would also elect that a certain 100 families should be raised to dizzy summits of rank, and clothed on with offensive transmissible glories and privileges to the exclusion of the rest of the nation's families, including his own. They all looked unhit, and said they didn't know, that they had never thought about it before, and it hadn't ever occurred to them that a nation could be so situated that every man could have a say in the government. I said I had seen one, and that it would last until it had an established church. Again they were all unhit, at first. But presently one man looked up and asked me to state that proposition again. And state it slowly, so it could soak into his understanding. I did it, and after a little he had the idea, and he brought his fist down and said he didn't believe a nation where every man had a vote would voluntarily get down in the mud and dirt in any such way, and that to steal from a nation its will and preference must be a crime and the first of all crimes. I said to myself, this one's a man. If I were backed by enough of his sort, I would make a strike for the welfare of this country, and try to prove myself its loyalist citizen by making a wholesome change in its system of government. You see, my kind of loyalty was loyalty to one's country, not to its institutions or its office holders. The country is the real thing, the substantial thing, the eternal thing. It is the thing to watch over, and care for, and be loyal to. Institutions are extraneous, they are its mere clothing, and clothing can wear out, become ragged, cease to be comfortable, cease to protect the body from winter, disease, and death. To be loyal to rags, to shout for rags, to worship rags, to die for rags. That is a loyalty of unreason, it is pure animal, it belongs to monarchy, was invented by monarchy, let monarchy keep it. I was from Connecticut, whose constitution declares that all political power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their benefit, and that they have at all times an undeniable and indefeasible right to alter their form of government in such a manner as they may think expedient. Under that gospel, The citizen who thinks he sees that the Commonwealth's political clothes are worn out, and yet holds his peace and does not agitate for a new suit, is disloyal, he is a traitor. That he may be the only one who thinks he sees this decay, does not excuse him, it is his duty to agitate anyway, and it is the duty of the others to vote him down if they do not see the matter as he does. And now here I was, in a country where a right to say how the country should be governed was restricted to 6 persons in each 1,000 of its population. For the 994 to express dissatisfaction with the regnant system and propose to change it, would have made the whole 6 shudder as one man. It would have been so disloyal, so dishonorable, such putrid black treason. So to speak, I was become a stockholder in a corporation where 994 of the members furnished all the money and did all the work, and the other 6 elected themselves a permanent board of direction and took all the dividends. It seemed to me that what the 994 dupes needed was a new deal. The thing that would have best suited the circus side of my nature would have been to resign the bossship and get up an insurrection and turn it into a revolution. But I knew that the Jack Cade or the Wat Tyler who tries such a thing without first educating his materials up to revolution grade is almost absolutely certain to get left. I had never been accustomed to getting left, even if I do say it myself. Wherefore, the deal which had been for some time working into shape in my mind was of a quite different pattern from the Cade-Tyler sort. So I did not talk blood and insurrection to that man there who sat munching black bread with that abused and mistaught herd of human sheep, but took him aside and talked matter of another sort to him. After I had finished, I got him to lend me a little ink from his veins, and with this and a sliver I wrote on a piece of bark. Put him in the man-factory, and gave it to him, and said, "Take it to the palace at Camelot and give it into the hands of Amias Le Poulet, whom I call Clarence. And he will understand. He is a priest, then," said the man, and some of the enthusiasm went out of his face. "How, a priest? Didn't I tell you that no chattel of the church, no bond slave of pope or bishop can enter my manufactory? Didn't I tell you that you couldn't enter unless your religion, whatever it might be, was your own free property? Marry, it is so, and for that I was glad, wherefore it liked me not, and bred in me a cold doubt, to hear of this priest being there. But he isn't a priest. I tell you." The man looked far from satisfied. He said, "He is not a priest, and yet can read? He is not a priest and yet can read, yes, and write, too, for that matter. I taught him myself." The man's face cleared. "And it is the first thing that you yourself will be taught in that factory." I would give blood out of my heart to know that art." "Why, I will be your slave, No, you won't be anybody's slave. Take your family and go along. Your lord the bishop will confiscate your small property, but no matter. Clarence will fix you all right. Do you think Hank Morgan's efforts to modernize Camelot and challenge feudal traditions in chapters 10-13 inspire you to question outdated systems or practices in your own world?"
This has been an EMC reading from Liberty Myself. To learn more about our project to create decentralized media alternatives, visit libertymyself.com. By creating Liberty Myself, we create liberty for all. This has been an EMC reading from Liberty Myself. To learn more about our project to create decentralized media alternatives, visit libertymyself.com. By creating Liberty Myself, we create liberty for all.